My name is Jonathan Law. I'm the Director of the Minerals Down Under National Research Flagship. Minerals Down Under is one of 11 national research flagships in Australia that are led by the CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation. And the role of those flagships is to focus on the major national research challenges facing the country. And the one that I run is called Minerals Down Under. And our job is to look towards the long-term sustainability and health of the minerals industry here in Australia. Australia faces many of the same challenges that occur elsewhere in the world, and some of those are the fact that we're not finding as many new deposits as we have historically, so the long-term health of the resource base is at risk. The resources that we are found tend to be lower grade and in many cases more complex and often more deeply buried than the resources we've mined in the past. So there is a gradual decline in the quality and grade of our ore deposits. And of course, also we have to remember that there's very strong growing social and environmental pressures on all industries, including the mining industry. So the competition for resources like water and energy between industries is becoming more competitive. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of increased capital and operating costs across the business, which is related very much to the skill shortage that we particularly have here in some sectors in Australia. What we try and do with our research program is to make sure there's obvious benefit for Australia, and also to provide opportunities for Australian technologies to get deployed around the world to build the services and manufacturing sectors. So one of the exciting technologies that we're working on at the moment is a new process to process nickel laterite ore bodies. Nickel laterites are the most abundant source of nickel in Australia, but at the moment the bulk of Australia's production comes from sulfide deposits. So we are working with a company called Direct Nickel on a pilot facility that will allow us to process these nickel laterites at a much lower cost and make the Australian laterite deposits competitive with the global sulfide deposits. So that's a technology that's being trialled in Perth as we speak, and if those trials are successful, and they're certainly looking promising, then that'll be a technology that's ready to be deployed into industry. There's probably 5 technology areas that I think are going to make a fundamental difference in the future, and some of them are not purely around pieces of kit or equipment, but they're fundamentally different approaches to how we manage the mining industry. The first one is that we have to recognize that the industry is no longer an economic industry independent of the social and environmental constraints. So there's a very strong move within the mining industry to integrate technologies that are beneficial socially and benign to the environment or improve the environment along with the economic benefits of the industry. So there's a whole suite of technologies that are enabling us to share that journey with other stakeholders. And that's very important when you bear in mind the long payback periods and the very high risk involved in developing mining projects that might run for 50 years or more. So those social and environmental technologies are fundamental to the future of the industry. The second one that we're focusing on is what we call embracing complexity. And this is to do with the fact that as we start to exploit these more complicated ore bodies, we really need real-time information that allows us to be much more sensible about how we process and manage mining operations. So we're on the cusp of a major generational change in mining where real-time sensors that monitor grade, physical characteristics, the location of equipment and people, the safety and environmental conditions right across the mine site are becoming viable options. So we expect to see a whole generation of sensors come on board together with real-time data sharing and processing that allows us to operate mines in much more the same way that manufacturing operates at the moment, which is a very data-rich environment and very precise control over the operation. So that data and computer framework will then allow us to process ore bodies in what I like to say gets rid of the sledgehammer approach, which is doing everything to the lowest common denominator and focusing on the variability and seeing that as an opportunity for the future. So that's a fundamental change that's going to come very quickly. The third one is modular automated equipment and remote control of that equipment. And this plays into the changes that you've seen in the WA iron ore industry, where automated equipment is becoming more important. But we see changes to much more consistency of equipment in the mining industry. So at the moment, much of the technology that's deployed is actually uniquely made for that specific mining operation. And we see great operations to modularize and standardize equipment and be able to monitor and deploy that equipment from remote sites so that we can start to take advantage of those economies of scale that the mining industry hasn't been able to take advantage of so far. So that'll allow much more standardization and reduce costs. The fourth one is what we call closing the loop, and this is to do with the fact that our use of resources as a society is still fairly wasteful, and there's enormous opportunities to make sure that we close the loop in terms of the inputs into mining, things like water and energy, also close the loop in terms of reprocessing and recycling, and making sure that we get the most from the sub-economic components of ore bodies that at the moment are just been reporting to the waste dumps. So there's enormous savings in recycling, but also in making sure that we're more effective in using the overall wealth of ore bodies rather than just a major commodity. The fifth one is what we call integrated solutions, and this really pulls together everything that I've talked about previously. And what we're trying to do here is to make sure that the mining industry is well integrated with other technologies and industries in the Australian economy. And an example of that in operation is the work that we're doing in the steel industry at the moment with our dry slag granulation activities, which recover the waste heat from slag cooling and reuse that in other commercial processes, and at the same time take the slag material, which is currently a waste material that goes to the dump, and provide a valuable feedstock into the cement industry. So these synergies between industries is an area of huge opportunity for the future. Minerals Down Under provides the interface between the industry, the research community, and the services and manufacturing sectors to develop and commercialise a suite of technologies that are specifically tailor-made for the Australian minerals industry and the challenges that the industry faces, to allow them to operate in a globally competitive fashion, and hopefully also to export those technologies on a global scale around the world. There is a lot of repetitiveness in the system at the moment, and a lot of technologies end up stranded because they're either protected by one company or they simply don't have a commercial partner to deliver them into the market. I think the environment is changing for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think the research community is recognizing the need for technologies that are immediately relevant to industry. And secondly, industry are recognizing that having a very protective approach to intellectual property and being very protective of new technologies actually works against the larger scale savings that potentially come from having standard technologies deployed across the industry. So there is a move afoot from both directions, and one of the things that the Flagship is looking to achieve is to help bridge that interface. There's plenty of scope for short-term solutions that impact directly on the bottom line of independent businesses, but there's also a very strong need for a coordinated industry approach to the longer-term strategic challenges. And this is one of the reasons why we think it's important for the industry to come together as a whole and identify those longer-term strategies and then work as a cohesive industry to deliver those outcomes. There are very significant challenges for the future that are going to require a different approach to innovation to balance short-term rewards but also long-term strategic initiatives to make sure that the bigger challenges are also looked after. So if we can really balance effectively the research community with the service providers and with the consumers of mining technologies in a more effective way, we could really transform the value that we get from our investment in mining research.